Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney, retired. None of what follows is legal advice. I'm here to do some video for you today to talk about an interesting subject on the law, and here it is. Well, today is day 6 of the cruise, and Happy New Year to you. We are in the Panama Canal Zone today, and we're getting ready to take a tour that will allow us to see the Panama Canal. When I was getting some suggestions for all these things that I was going to be putting up for use when I was on my cruise, a subscriber asked me to make a video on how to be a good juror. And I've had to think long and hard about this because this is not a one-size-fits-all answer. So let's get started. The first requirement for jury service, other than being a citizen and obviously selected by the county, is to be honest, sometimes even brutally honest. Why? Because not every person is an ideal fit for every case. Not every person is going to be able to be a good juror based on the type of case that's in front of the court. Let's take a hypothetical case from my perspective. Now, my mother was a smoker for 40 years. She smoked 2 packs a day of Chesterfields, which were unfiltered, and there was not an item in her clothing that didn't stink like burnt tobacco. I rode down many a highway as a child in the back seat of a Volkswagen. Volkswagens had these little pop-out back windows that I guess were designed to let air flow through the car from the front windows. But both my mom and dad smoked like a lead smelter, and I figure I had about 4 cigarettes for every 20 miles we went down the road. It was hideous. My only relief was sticking my nose out that tiny little crack in the back of the window and trying to get a breath of fresh air every now and then. And once, in addition to a breath of fresh air, I got a yellow jacket, but it was so surprised it ran into my big honking nose that it didn't even sting me. I grew up with a loathing of smokers, not as people, but as a class of domestic polluter. Of course, now, with age, I understand that it's an addiction and that the dopamine receptors in their brains are wired for more. They can't help it, most of them. I feel sorry for them. But I loved my mom. I mean, everybody loves their mom. Oddly, I found myself in a profession that dealt with a lot of smokers. Well, usually a lot of ex-smokers. Respiratory care. Although there were a few people who were smokers who actually smoked while they were using oxygen, which sounds completely strange, but yes, people do that. And I had a respiratory therapist who said that he was going to make $1 million by making a cigarette holder for a tracheostomy tube. And yeah, there are people that are that addicted. Sorry. Funny story. Lots of chronic lung patients are smokers who develop chronic bronchitis. And chronic bronchitis produces lots and lots of mucus. And when these people have an exacerbation of that, they will come in just almost with pneumonia and they'll cough up gobs of stuff. And it wasn't uncommon when I did treatments for these folks. I'd go into their room and they would pull one of those plastic kidney-shaped bins off their tray table and they'd hand it up and they'd show it to me and they'd say, "You want to see what I coughed up this morning?" Well, I was always tempted to say, "You want to see my breakfast?" But I never did. Those folks were proud that the therapy that we gave them helped them clear their lungs, and they just wanted to show they were doing their part. But over the years, I intubated and ventilated hundreds of them in their last moments on Earth, trying very hard to keep them alive and usually failing in the end. Eventually, I got out of the field of respiratory care and became a lawyer. Then, at age 69, my mom developed lung cancer and died. Now, if I was asked to sit as a juror in a civil case involving damages from smoking, from someone who smoked 40 years and was suing big tobacco for zillions of dollars, I would not be an ideal juror. And the reason is simple. I know the law, I know the medicine, I know what smoking does to you, and I have an animus against tobacco companies. But I do no longer hold a grudge against smokers, as I said. So let's assume I'm not an honest guy. When asked on voir dire if I would have any strong feelings about smoking, I'd say no. And then I'd stick it to the tobacco companies when I got on the jury. But if I honored my oath to tell the truth, I would have to say, yes, I do have strong feelings. And no, I probably cannot put those feelings aside and be fair and decide the case on the evidence. Because in my experience, and I'd have to be honest, I'd say I can't do that. I know far too much. I know that the defense experts, the first thing they say is going to be a lie, and the last thing they say is going to be a lie. And the only way you'll know they're lying is that their lips will be moving. Could not sit for a medical malpractice jury either. I worked in that field. I know too much about it. And I have to believe that when I was early in my career, I was a victim of medical malpractice. I would have to be honest about that. I couldn't sit as a juror in a med mal case. Being willing to admit that you have biases is not a weakness. It doesn't make you a bad person. Everyone has biases. It's actually a strength to admit that you are biased in some way or the other. And to be a good juror, you have to be able to put aside your feelings about certain things and decide the issues on the evidence in the case. Now, if you had a contract issue between two big companies, I could sit for that. If you had an antitrust claim, I could sit in the jury for that. I'd be fine with that because I don't have a great deal of animus against corporations. And I feel very strongly that I could be fair and a good juror in a case like that. And that's because, again, I don't have those kinds of biases. The next qualification for jury service is the ability to think critically and pay close attention to the evidence. Sometimes cases have more than two sides. Sometimes there are interveners. Sometimes there are multiple defendants. Suppose a bus goes into a skid, crashes into trees, killing several children in the process. The plaintiff says that the driver was going too fast for conditions, that the company was liable because the bus was poorly maintained, and that the manufacturer of the anti-lock brakes contributed to the accident by not locking up the wheels, or by not doing what it was supposed to do in terms of anti-lock. So in a trial like that, there will be evidence against all these parties, and you have to keep it straight and apply the evidence to the right parties in the case. And the ability to remember testimony is important, as is the ability to keep who it applies to straight in your head. Then you have to think critically about the evidence and the experts. Does the expert witness who used to work for the bus company and who says they routinely lied on federal forms maybe have an axe to grind? Does the doctor have some liability that he's trading for a friendly testimony on behalf of the plaintiff? You have to think carefully about all of these things. You have to evaluate the evidence, and you have to give it the weight that it deserves. And that's something that only you, as a juror, sitting in a courtroom, can do. And so it's very important to think critically about the evidence. One of the things that's really important is not to deliberate too quickly. Many times, in my opinion, the prosecutor will get up in opening statement and lay out the elements of the crime that someone is facing to be convicted of. And jurors, when they hear the state's case or the government's case, they tick off the first three elements, and all of a sudden they know the guy is a convict, and they tune out everything else. And when the defendant gets up and says, hey, you heard this, but you didn't hear that, they're like, yeah, go away. I don't want to hear from you. So you have to have some degree of ability to think critically and to put to the test all of the evidence in the case. Next, you have to be a logical person. You have to understand that correlation is not causation, and that simply because two things happen close in time together doesn't mean that they are related to each other. You have to keep an open mind, and you have to be willing during deliberations to listen to the views of the other jurors without necessarily changing your opinion. In other words, if you have a strong belief, you should state it. And if you can work with the other jurors, that's great, but you are absolutely not required to compromise your beliefs in order to reach a verdict. If the other people want to vote 11 to 1 to convict and you don't want to convict, you have every right to stand on that right and not be a part of that. A juror also has to be observant. Was the witness wiggling back and forth in his chair when he was testifying? Was the witness unable or unwilling to answer questions? Did he look away when the questions were asked? Did he mumble a little bit when the answer was given? Did he sound like he was actually telling the truth? Did he make eye contact? These kinds of things are important. You need to be observant when you're a juror so that you can understand perhaps what's going on in someone's head when they're answering questions. Some experience with different people from different backgrounds and a willingness not to judge folks on the basis of their clothing or their hair or other personal characteristics is also important. A lot of times people don't come into court on the best day of their life. Somebody who is, facing a jail term might very well come in jail scrubs. And, it's difficult not to judge them on that basis, but you should not. But mannerisms related to truth telling, like making eye contact, looking away, not paying attention or looking over here in the third space instead of looking at the questioner or looking at the jury when you're answering a question, those mannerisms relate to truth telling, and it's helpful in the evaluation, ultimately, in being a good juror. Finally, you have to understand that litigation is really pretty serious businesses. Small businesses can be sued out of existence. Not all claims are valid. Not every claim is a shady lawyer trying to make it rain. There are some good claims, there are some bad claims. People need to be good at differentiating the two. Catastrophically injured people need financial support, and it makes more sense for the people who harmed them than the government to pay responsible for those costs. But just because somebody has been catastrophically injured doesn't mean someone else is at fault. Many times, people who are catastrophically injured are injured as a result of their own fault, or they have some shared fault with the other party. It boils down to these factors: listen carefully, critically evaluate testimony, understand the jury instructions, follow the jury instructions, ask for help from the judge if you need it, and reach the result that is the most fair at the end of the day. That is generally the best way to be a good juror. Take your job seriously, think long and hard about what's going on in the case, and do the best job you can in finding the truth. So that's what I have for you today. I hope you had a great New Year's Day, and if you would, come on back down and join me tomorrow down here at the beach. I'll be on my way back to Galveston at that point. We have a sea day tomorrow. But thank you so much for watching, and if you have any comments, drop them in the comments down below. Like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. We always ask you to do that. And if you would, try and do a kindness for somebody today. And then when you're done, come on back down, join me at the beach, and we'll think about something else tomorrow. Hey, as I said at the beginning, none of what I said is legal advice. But let me tell you what, the stuff that's going to be right up here, these are the things that YouTube thinks you might be interested in going forward. Have a terrific day.